How were the stones of Egypt cut as if by laser thousands of years before lasers existed? How did Roman concrete heal itself underwater while our modern versions crumble within decades? And why did a small clay jar found in the deserts of Iraq generate electricity more than 2 millennia before the invention of the battery? Science calls them coincidences. But the pattern is too consistent, too deliberate, too precise. Across civilizations, the same story repeats. Humanity achieves the impossible, then forgets how. What if the greatest mystery of history isn't what we've lost, but how we keep losing it? We are taught that history is a line smooth and confident, rising from primitive caves to Silicon cities. But what if it isn't a line at all? What if it's a loop, each cycle beginning with discovery and ending in deliberate forgetting? Somewhere in that loop, technologies appear that modern science can't reproduce. Not myths, not miracles. Evidence carved into stone, alloyed into metal, sealed into clay. And every time we approach understanding something, war, religion, empire erases the memory. The first disappearance was a fire that burned upon water. The year was 673. Constantinople was dying. The Arab fleet had surrounded the city, hundreds of ships stretching across the Bosphorus, black sails, gleaming with oil under the sun. The Byzantine army was exhausted, the empire ready to collapse. And then from its harbor walls came something the world had never seen. A stream of flame erupted from bronze tubes, hit the sea, and refused to die. The water itself ignited. Eyewitnesses said it was like watching the end of the world. Ships burned as they fled, men dove into the sea only to be devoured by the same fire they sought to escape. The empire was saved and the legend of Greek fire was born. Historians still cannot explain it. Chronicles describe a liquid flame that clung to any surface, even to waves, and burned brighter the more one tried to extinguish it. The recipe was known only to a handful of imperial chemists sworn to silence. Records mention petroleum, quicklime, sulfur, resin, but even when chemists combine these ingredients today, the results fail. Sometimes the mixture explodes uncontrollably, sometimes it refuses to ignite at all. Something is missing, perhaps a ratio, a process, or an understanding that modern science no longer possesses. Some believe the knowledge originated far earlier than Byzantium, inherited from Egypt's temple alchemists or Persian metallurgists who experimented with living flame. Whatever its source, it was guarded like a holy relic. When Constantinople fell in 1453, the formula disappeared completely. Maybe it was destroyed to keep it from enemy hands, or maybe the last guardians carried it into secrecy. The question is not only how it worked, but why it vanished so perfectly. Civilizations forget ordinary tools. They bury dangerous ones. Imagine if it had survived, if humanity had continued perfecting the control of fire itself. Would we have advanced faster or destroyed ourselves sooner? The story of Greek fire reveals something universal. Power demands secrecy, and secrecy breeds extinction. The Byzantines preserved their empire, but at the cost of understanding. To protect themselves, they turned knowledge into religion. They worshipped the weapon instead of studying it, and so it died with them. Greek fire was not just a formula, it was a system, a mastery of chemistry, pressure, and metallurgy centuries ahead of its time. The precision required to project liquid flame from siphons suggests an understanding of physics we would not rediscover for 1,000 years. Was this brilliance a coincidence or a faint echo of an older forgotten science? Perhaps these artisans were not inventors, but rememberers inheriting fragments from a civilization whose ruins still lie beneath our own. Across the centuries, the pattern repeats. The Antikythera Mechanism, an intricate box of bronze gears found under the Aegean Sea, could track planetary movements and predict eclipses with modern accuracy. Yet no other device like it was ever discovered. Its builders disappeared, its purpose faded into myth. The Baghdad battery produced measurable current, but no one seems to have known what electricity was. Roman concrete grows stronger with age, healing itself in water, but the method of mixing it was lost for nearly 2,000 years. Each of these miracles emerged from the same arc: discovery, mastery, disappearance. If they were isolated, we could dismiss them as accidents. But together they form a map of memory and erasure of civilizations, touching brilliance, and then collapsing into silence. Archaeology shows us fragments, stones cut with laser-like precision in Egypt walls, fused like glass in Peru, steel from Damascus containing carbon nanotubes long before nanotechnology existed. We marvel at them, But we rarely ask the deeper question, why does our species keep rediscovering what it already knew? Maybe progress is not a climb, but a repetition, a wave pattern rising and falling as knowledge burns too brightly to endure. Every time humanity reaches for the divine fireflight, immortality it seems to pay with amnesia. Libraries burn, empires fall, languages vanish. Knowledge too dangerous for its own age is hidden, ritualized, or destroyed. Some truths are not lost by time but by intention. Greek fire, Damascus steel, Roman concrete, the Baghdad battery. They all share the same ending, disappearance by design. Power fears what it cannot control, and power has always feared knowledge. When science begins to imitate creation itself, those who rule must choose between progress and order. And almost every time they choose order. Yet traces remain scattered like breadcrumbs through history. The corroded gears of the Antikythera Mechanism, a shipwreck in the Aegean. A temple inscription that mentions fire drawn from the sea. Fragments that whisper of forgotten continuities. Perhaps these remnants are not anomalies but messages. Perhaps they exist to remind us that we are not the first to stand at the edge of understanding. The ancients may have reached further than we dare to admit, and what they lost was not simply technology, but a worldview, a belief that science and spirit could coexist, that discovery was an act of reverence rather than dominance. When that unity breaks, knowledge fractures with it. The secret dies, and centuries later, we call it myth. Today our laboratories glow with light the ancients could only dream of, yet the questions remain eerily the same. We still chase energy that cannot be contained, materials that do not decay, life that does not end. We name our projects after gods, Prometheus, Apollo, Hermes, as if remembering something deep in our collective past. Perhaps what we call innovation is only recollection, an attempt to reassemble a memory that history keeps erasing. Greek fire was not the beginning of technology, nor its end. It was a warning written in flame that every civilization carries a light too powerful for its own hands, and that the moment it burns brightest is also the moment it begins to forget. The sea outside Istanbul still glows faintly at dusk, reflecting the last light of the sun. For an instant, the water shimmers like molten bronze, as if the memory of that impossible fire still lingers beneath the surface, waiting for someone to remember the formula and to decide whether to keep it or to let it vanish once more. In the spring of 1901, off the coast of a small Greek island named Antikythera, a group of sponge divers stumbled upon something that would change everything we thought we knew about the ancient world. Beneath 60 meters of blue water lay the remains of a Roman shipwreck, its timbers buried under centuries of coral and time. Among the statues, amphorae and fragments of bronze, one object refused to fit. At first it looked like nothing, just a lump of corroded metal fused to rock. But when it was lifted into sunlight, the sea revealed a secret. Within that lump were gears. Tiny, intricate, impossible gears. The divers had no idea that what they carried to the surface was the oldest known machine on Earth. It would take decades before anyone realized that this artifact, now called the Antikythera Mechanism, was an astronomical computer built more than 2,000 years ago, centuries before the first clockwork appeared in medieval Europe. X-rays taken in the 20th century revealed a network of more than 30 bronze gears, some no larger than a thumbnail cut with mathematical precision. When turned by a crank, they moved together in perfect harmony, predicting solar and lunar eclipses, tracking planetary cycles, and calculating the movements of the sun and moon through the zodiac. The inscriptions etched into its casing spoke in the language of astronomy, but the craftsmanship spoke in the language of something else, memory. Because nothing like it should have existed. The mathematics required for such a device demand knowledge of differential, gearing, trigonometric ratios, and the mechanics of torque concepts that, according to the history we teach, had not yet been invented. Whoever built it was centuries ahead of their time or centuries out of place. Scholars attribute the design to the school of Hipparchus, the Greek astronomer who mapped the stars with stunning accuracy in the 2nd century before Christ. But no text ever mentions a machine. It is as if someone erased the entire lineage of a technology, leaving behind only one physical memory, like a page torn from a forgotten encyclopedia. The Antikythera Mechanism should have changed the world. Instead, it sank. When it was found, it was already broken, its gears frozen, its purpose lost beneath rust and coral. And perhaps that was fitting because it mirrored what had happened to knowledge itself. The gears of civilization had turned then stopped, and no one remembered how to make them move again. If the story of Greek fire was about harnessing nature's fury, this story is about harnessing nature's order, the attempt to translate the heavens into metal. It is one thing to look up and see the stars. It is another to hold their motion in your hands. The Antikythera Mechanism did exactly that. It turned the sky into something measurable, predictable, mechanical. And yet after its creation, the world turned away from such precision for over a millennium. Why, some say it was the fall of empires, the collapse of Greece into Rome, of Rome into chaos that scattered the knowledge. Others believe it was philosophy itself that betrayed the machine. Greek thought divided the world between the physical and the divine. To map the heavens too perfectly was to trespass upon sacred ground. Perhaps the mechanism was buried not only by the sea but by fear, the same fear that once hid the formula of Greek fire. There is another possibility, quieter but more haunting, that the mechanism was not an invention at all, but a reconstruction. What if its creator was not the first but the last of his kind? A craftsman remembering fragments of a science that predated even Greece. The bronze gears, the celestial mathematics, the mirrored ratios between earth and sky. These are not inventions born from chaos. They are the signatures of continuity, the fingerprints of a lineage that did not begin where we think it did. When researchers built digital models of the device, they found that its calculations accounted for irregularities in the moon's orbit, imperfections invisible to the naked eye. Whoever designed it knew how to correct for the anomaly, known as the lunar anomaly, something not rediscovered until the Renaissance. How could that be? Did one man simply guess, or did he inherit something he could no longer explain? Only imitate. The inscriptions on the Antikythera plates mention cycles. Saros, Metonic, Callipic words that describe repeating patterns of time. To the ancients, these were not merely astronomical terms. They were expressions of a philosophy that everything from the movements of the planets to the fate of empires operates in repeating loops. The mechanism, then, was more than a calculator. It was a model of reality, a physical embodiment of the idea that time itself is cyclical. It remembered the sky not as history, but as recurrence. And in that sense, it was not just a machine, it was a metaphor for civilization itself. We too are built from gears that turn a line and eventually grind to a halt. Each age builds its own Antikythera, its own device of impossible precision, then forgets how it was made. Every rediscovery feels new only because the memory of the previous one has been erased. When the mechanism was first exhibited in Athens, people stared at it behind glass as if it were an alien artifact. In a way, it was. It belonged to a species of human thought that no longer exists, a worldview in which science and philosophy were inseparable. Its creator was not an engineer in the modern sense, but a philosopher of motion, someone who believed that to understand the universe, one must imitate its rhythm. And perhaps that is what we have lost, not the technology, but the reason to make it. Modern engineers can now replicate the mechanism's movements using computers and lasers, yet something intangible is still missing. The replicas work, but they do not feel alive. The ancient original was built by hand, each gear cut with patient intuition, each ratio derived not from equations, but from observation and reverence. Its precision was not mechanical, it was human. In that sense, the Antikythera Mechanism might be the purest form of technology ever made, a union of intellect and awe. It translated the chaos of the cosmos into a language of order, but not to dominate it, to participate in it. Its maker did not seek control over the heavens. He sought conversation with them. When it sank, so did that worldview. For the next 1,000 years, Europe's understanding of the cosmos regressed into superstition and theology. The gears of time stopped turning. Humanity forgot that it once built a machine capable of predicting the future by listening to the rhythm of the sky. Even now, when scientists peer at the X-ray scans and digital reconstructions, they admit that they still don't know everything about how it worked. Some fragments are missing wheels without teeth, inscriptions too eroded to read. But maybe that incompleteness is itself the message. The mechanism is a broken memory, and perhaps that is what we are meant to see. Because history itself operates the same way, fragments of brilliance surrounded by corrosion. What we call progress might just be the part of the wheel that happens to survive. When the rest falls away, we start over convinced we are the first. There's a quiet irony in the fact that the Antikythera Mechanism, built to predict cycles, became trapped in one. It was designed to remember, but the world forgot it. And in forgetting, we fulfilled its prophecy that knowledge too follows the path of the planets, vanishing, reappearing, repeating forever. Perhaps the device was never meant to be practical. Perhaps it was a message disguised as a tool to remind us that the universe is not linear, and neither are we. Every discovery we celebrate is a rediscovery. Every new dawn is an echo of an older light. When divers brought the mechanism up from the seabed, they thought they had found treasure. They were wrong. What they had found was a mirror, not of gold, but of memory, a reflection of what we used to be and what we might become again if we learn to listen to the rhythm of the turning sky. And as scientists continue to scan its corroded fragments, they still hear faint traces of motion, a gear that once moved with the precision of time itself. It turns even in silence, whispering the same question that echoes through all forgotten knowledge. If we once built machines that could remember the universe, why do we, the descendants of their makers, remember so little of ourselves? Across the deserts of Syria and Persia, there once existed a metal so perfect it seemed alive. When sunlight touched it, the surface shimmered with patterns that looked like flowing water ripples of light frozen in steel. Warriors claimed it could slice a hair drifting in the air or cut through iron armor without dulling. To the world, it was known as Damascus Steel, and to those who forged it, it was not merely a weapon, but a secret. For centuries, it defined power. Crusader knights carried stories of it back to Europe, where blacksmiths tried in vain to reproduce the miracle. They melted, hammered, folded, prayed, yet their blades remained dull, brittle, ordinary. The true Damascus steel resisted imitation. Its strength lay not only in its material, but in its mystery. And like all mysteries, it vanished. The origins of this legendary metal trace back to ancient workshops where heat, rhythm, and ritual were inseparable. Blacksmiths worked by firelight, their hammers rising and falling like heartbeats. They called their steel woots, a word that came from the southern lands of India, where the first ingots were born. Inside those crucibles, iron mingled with carbon under carefully controlled temperatures, a balance so delicate that even a single breath, too long, could ruin the batch. The result was a microstructure so advanced that modern microscopes reveal formations of carbon nanotubes, materials we only began to understand in the 21st century. How could artisans with no knowledge of chemistry or physics create a substance with atomic-level engineering? Some argue it was pure chance, the accidental outcome of a rare ore combined with ancient smelting techniques. Others sense intention, a knowledge passed through generations, not by words, but by muscle rhythm and intuition. Each Damascus blade bore a signature pattern known as the watermark, a swirling motif of dark and light bands running along the surface. This was not decoration, it was structure, the visible fingerprint of perfection. The process required heating and cooling the metal in precise intervals, folding it until the boundaries between matter and craftsmanship dissolved. The smith's eye, not instruments, judged the temperature by the color of flame and the sound of steel. A few degrees too high, and the carbon would burn away. Too low, and the layers would not fuse. There was no written formula, only memory. And memory, unlike stone or metal, can die. By the 17th century, the secret had already begun to fade. The mines that provided the unique ore, rich in trace elements like vanadium and tungsten, were depleted. The smiths who had once mastered the delicate dance of temperature and timing had died without apprentices capable of replacing them. Within a few generations, the art that had shaped empires was gone. Modern metallurgists have spent decades trying to recreate Damascus steel. Some have come close, replicating the patterns, even the hardness, but never the soul. Something subtle refuses to return. The ancient blades still ring differently when struck. They sing. Scientists hear it as resonance. The ancients heard it as spirit. Perhaps both are true. In the West, we tend to separate art from science, war from beauty, matter from meaning. But Damascus steel existed in a world where those boundaries had not yet been drawn. To forge a blade was to engage in a form of alchemy, transforming base metal into a vessel of divine order. The blacksmith's furnace was not just a workshop, it was a temple. Fire purified, hammering consecrated, and the final polish revealed what they called the soul of the blade. That idea may sound poetic, but it reveals something profound. For the smiths of Damascus, perfection was not an accident. It was a state of alignment between human discipline and natural law. The blade's power came from harmony, not domination. When modern science studies these ancient weapons, it focuses on their chemistry. But what if their true strength came from something science cannot measure: the philosophy of their creation? Because each Damascus blade was a paradox. It was both art and instrument of death, beauty designed to kill. The same craftsmanship that elevated human skill to its highest point was used to end lives with efficiency. Perhaps that is why the secret vanished. Maybe it was not forgotten by accident, but by necessity. Humanity could not bear the perfection it had made. The story repeats. When knowledge grows too powerful, it hides itself. Greek fire burned its creators. The Antikythera Mechanism was drowned by the sea. Damascus Steel turned its brilliance into blood. Every lost technology carries the same lesson: we destroy what we cannot control. Some researchers have proposed that the loss of Damascus Steel was purely material: the depletion of ore, the disruption of trade routes, the fall of empires. But deeper than the economics lies a symbolic truth: when the connection between craft and meaning breaks, knowledge decays. The old masters did not teach through manuals. They taught through presence. Their apprentices learned by watching the light in the forge, by feeling the rhythm of impact through their bones. When those forges went dark, an entire language of creation disappeared with them. Modern attempts to replicate the steel through algorithms and furnaces may succeed technically, but they fail spiritually. The ancient process demanded patience measured in lifetimes. A single sword could take months to complete. Every step was a conversation between human and element. Today we pursue results, not reverence. Perhaps that difference explains why the ancient blades endure in legend while ours rust in museums. There is another stranger layer to the story. In many Middle Eastern texts, the blacksmith is described as both creator and destroyer, a figure who wields divine fire but risks becoming consumed by it. To forge Damascus steel was to stand at the threshold between worlds mortal and immortal, order and chaos. The process itself was initiation. Those who succeeded were revered. Those who failed vanished, their names unrecorded. Maybe that is why no complete record survives. The knowledge was meant to be earned, not written. Under the microscope, Damascus steel reveals patterns of alternating bands, hard and soft layers intertwined. Metallurgists call it microsegregation. Philosophers might call it balance. Strength and flexibility, darkness and light, creation and destruction, each dependent on the other. The blade survives precisely because it accepts contradiction. It bends but does not break. It kills but also endures as art. It is in every sense human. That duality is what makes Damascus steel more than a lost technology. It is a mirror. When we look at it, we see ourselves at the moment we believed we could master nature, and the moment we learned that mastery comes with a price. Today, a handful of modern artisans claim to have rediscovered the secret. Their blades gleam with similar patterns, their edges rival the originals. Yet even they admit something feels different. The texture is right, but the resonance is wrong. The old steel seems to hold light in a way modern alloys cannot. Perhaps what is missing is not chemical, but temporal. The ancient blades were born in a slower world where knowledge was carried by ritual and silence, not by data and replication. What we have lost is not the technique, but the patience that made it possible. When you hold an authentic Damascus sword in your hands, you can still see the faint shimmer of its pattern shift with the light. It moves like liquid trapped in solid form. You can almost feel the echo of the forge, the rhythm of hammer on anvil, the hiss of quenching water, the breath of the man who shaped it centuries ago. It is the sound of memory. The blade that cut through armor also cuts through time. It divides eras, the age of creation and the age of forgetting. Somewhere along that line, humanity traded mastery for convenience, depth for speed. And in doing so, we dulled the edge of our own genius. Perhaps that is what Damascus steel was trying to tell us all along. Perfection is not meant to be permanent. The moment it is reached, it begins to disappear. The sharper the edge, the faster it fades. What remains is the reflection it leaves behind, a faint pattern glimmering in the dark, reminding us that we were once capable of beauty, so precise it frightened us. Damascus steel was more than metal. It was memory made tangible, forged in fire, and tempered by belief. And like all memory, it eventually cooled, fractured, and vanished. Yet somewhere hidden within the noise of our modern world, the echo of that hammer still rings. Every innovation we make, every alloy we create, is just another attempt to hear that sound again. The sound of a blade being born in a forge that no longer exists, cutting cleanly through the distance between what we know and what we have chosen to forget. 2,000 years ago on the shores of the Mediterranean, men mixed ash lime and seawater into a gray slurry and poured it into wooden molds. What they created still stands today. Harbors, aqueducts, domes, the bones of empire. Rome called it opus cementitium. We call it Roman concrete, and it has outlived its makers by millennia. Waves have broken against it for 2,000 years. Storms have clawed at it. Earthquakes have shaken it, yet it refuses to crumble. Engineers today can destroy mountains and raise towers of glass, but they cannot recreate this humble stone. Modern concrete cracks within decades. Roman concrete heals itself. That fact alone should have rewritten everything we know about material science. Instead, it was forgotten. When archaeologists began analyzing samples from ancient harbors like Cosa and Pozzuoli, they discovered something strange. Under the microscope, the concrete was not uniform like ours. It was alive. Crystals of rare minerals, aluminum tobermorit, and philipsite had formed within the structure, sealing cracks strengthening with age. Each fracture invited new growth, like a bone repairing itself. In a sense, Roman concrete was self-aware. It responded to its own decay by healing. No modern engineer could explain how such a reaction was possible. At first, scientists assumed luck. Perhaps the unique volcanic ash around the Bay of Naples contained special chemistry. But the deeper they studied, the more deliberate it seemed. The builders had not simply used local materials, they had chosen them for a purpose. The ash came from Mount Vesuvius, rich in reactive silica. The lime was not fully slaked, but left as quicklime tiny white fragments that when exposed to water, triggered exothermic reactions capable of refusing cracks centuries later. It was not an accident. It was design. And yet the Romans never wrote down a single exact formula. Vitruvius, the architect whose treatise survives, mentions ingredients in vague terms, ash, stone, water, but omits ratios, curing times, temperatures. Was this omission, ignorance, secrecy, or reverence? Perhaps they believed that such knowledge should not be reduced to numbers. In their worldview, building was an act of alignment between humanity and the gods. Materials were not inert, they were participants. Ash was the breath of volcanoes, lime, the memory of mountains, water, the spirit that bound them. To mix concrete was to perform a ritual of permanence. But permanence is a dangerous word. The more Rome built, the more it believed itself immune to time. Its concrete monuments, temples, baths, bridges became symbols of eternity. Rome will stand as long as her stones, said the poets. And yet the empire fell, leaving those same stones as the only survivors. The material outlasted the civilization that invented it. That irony might be the real lesson of Roman concrete. Humans can build things stronger than themselves, but never meanings that last as long. Consider the Pantheon, completed in 125 AD. Its dome, a perfect sphere of concrete spanning 142 feet, remains the largest unreinforced dome in the world. The Romans achieved this without steel, without rebar, without computers, only intuition and proportion. The lower levels used dense basalt aggregate, the upper levels used lightweight pumice. As the structure rises, the material becomes lighter, the stresses dissolve. The oculus at the top, a circle of open sky, distributes weight by absence rather than presence. They understood that strength sometimes means leaving space for light. How did that knowledge vanish? When the empire disintegrated, so did its infrastructure of apprenticeship. The masons who knew how to mix the lime, how to read the ash, how to feel the right consistency between their fingers, gone. Medieval builders replaced volcanic ash with river sand. The secret died not because it was hidden, but because no one remembered why it mattered. And as with Greek fire, the forgetting was complete. For over 1,500 years, humanity built weaker and weaker walls, mistaking survival for progress. Modern scientists rediscovered the secret only in the 21st century. Using scanning electron microscopes, they found that those tiny white lime clasts inside Roman concrete were not flaws but features. When water entered a crack, it dissolved the lime, redeposited it as new minerals, and sealed the wound. The concrete was not static, it was dynamic. It healed like skin. The Romans, without equations or theory, had engineered the first self-repairing material in history, and yet the rediscovery raises an unsettling question. If they achieved this 2,000 years ago, why did no one else remember? Did other civilizations know similar secrets? Egypt with its megalithic precision, the Incas with their seamless stones, and did they too lose them? It seems that every time humanity touches something, enduring time itself conspires to erase it. Perhaps eternity cannot be passed down. It must be rebuilt in every age. Roman concrete stands as both triumph and tombstone. It proves that human hands once mastered the chemistry of immortality and that we no longer understand what we've made. To the modern eye, these ruins are relics. To the Romans, they were proof that man could rival nature. But perhaps the greater wisdom lay in the material itself. It did not resist decay by force, but by adaptation. It accepted cracks and turned them into strength. In that sense, Roman concrete understood resilience better than we do. If we could translate that philosophy into our own age, what would it mean we build cities that gleam for a decade and rot within a century? We construct skyscrapers that scrape the sky but crumble in earthquakes. We pour concrete that dies faster than the people who walk on it. The ancients built differently. They built with patience, with reverence, with the humility of those who knew they were building for the gods, not for themselves. Perhaps that is the missing ingredient, the metaphysical binder that no microscope can detect. Their structures endure because they were made not merely of stone and ash, but of intention. They believed that to build well was to honor the divine order of the world. That belief infused their materials with meaning. Ours, though stronger in design, are weaker in purpose. Some historians suggest that the fall of Rome was not a collapse, but a transformation. The concrete kept building even as politics died. Roads remained, aqueducts flowed, domes stood. The empire dissolved, but its infrastructure became the skeleton of Europe. In that way, Roman concrete achieved what no ruler could: continuity. The stone refused to die even when the language that named it disappeared. Imagine standing in the ruins of Ostia as the tide rolls in. The sea strikes the old harbor walls built of volcanic ash and lime. Each wave carries salt and pressure. Small fractures form, the water seeps in. Deep inside the wall, something stirs, lime dissolving crystals, forming the stone knitting itself together again. 2,000 years later, the structure still breathes. It is not a ruin. It is alive. That image holds a quiet warning. Everything we build today, from our technologies to our societies, follows the same principle as concrete. What we choose to mix determines what will endure. If we build on arrogance, the structure will crack. If we build on understanding, it may heal. Rome's builders knew that strength is not resistance, but relationship, the way each part listens to the others. When scientists finally published their findings in 2023, proving that Roman concrete was self-healing, the news spread quickly. Engineers, celebrated companies sought to commercialize the formula. Yet amid the excitement, one truth remained untouched: we still do not know how the Romans discovered it in the first place. No record describes the process. No ancient laboratory notes exist. It remains, like all the other lost technologies, a message written in matter rather than words. Perhaps that is how civilizations speak to each other, through materials that survive the silence. Fire, metal, stone, all telling the same story, that knowledge is fragile, but meaning endures in what we make. The Romans believed their empire was eternal. They were wrong, but the stone they left behind still whispers across time. It tells us that eternity is not a place or a power. It is a practice. To build something that heals is to participate in the rhythm of the world, not to conquer it. Roman concrete, like the Antikythera Mechanism and Damascus Steel, reminds us that the ancients did not simply build stronger materials. They built with stronger beliefs. They saw creation as dialogue, not domination. Perhaps that is why their works endure while ours decay. Their stones were bound not only by chemistry, but by conviction. 2,000 years from now, when archaeologists dig through the rubble of our own cities, what will they find? Cracked asphalt, corroded steel and concrete turned to dust. Nothing self-healing, nothing remembering. The past may not have been more advanced in machines, but it was richer in meaning. The Roman walls still stand because their builders knew something we have forgotten, that strength without wisdom is brittle, and that true endurance begins not in the stone, but in the mind that shapes it. In the deserts of Egypt, where the air itself seems made of silence, there lies a knowledge that outlived its own civilization. Under pyramids and tombs carved deep into limestone, the ancient Egyptians practiced a technology that modern science can describe but not fully comprehend: the preservation of the human body against time. We call it mummification. They called it pere imheru, the coming forth by day. It was not a superstition. It was engineering guided by faith chemistry, guided by theology. They believed that to master death was not to escape nature, but to understand it. And for a moment in history, they succeeded. Even now, 3,000 years later, their bodies remain. Skin still clings to bone. Hair still gleams faintly under museum light. The very cells have resisted decay that devours everything else. We embalm our dead with chemicals, refrigerate, preserve, and yet no method we possess can rival theirs. The oldest mummies survived not for decades, but for millennia. Science has analyzed their linen wrappings, the resins, the salts, the oils, and yet the exact process still eludes us. The Egyptians began with observation. They noticed that bodies buried in dry sand did not rot. Heat and aridity drew out the fluids, halting the dance of bacteria. From that natural phenomenon, they built a theology. Death was not an end, they said, but a transition. The body was a vessel the soul would one day need again. So they began to refine the desert's crude preservation into a precise ritual. The process evolved over centuries until it became something closer to science than religion. First, the embalmers removed the organs most vulnerable to decay: the stomach, intestines, liver, lungs. The brain they extracted through the nose with hooked instruments. Yet they left the heart, believing it to be the seat of memory and judgment. The body was then filled with aromatic resins coated in oils and packed with natron, a natural salt mined from the desert. Over 70 days, the flesh dried, hardened, and stabilized. What remained was not a corpse, but a design, a human form reimagined to resist time. Under the hands of those embalmers, death became architecture. They built eternity, one body at a time. Their resins, when analyzed today, reveal complex mixtures: cedar oil, pistacia, resin, myrrh, frankincense, each chosen not only for scent, but for chemical property. Some contain natural antibacterial compounds that modern medicine rediscovers in laboratories. They created antiseptics before the word existed. The entire process was calibrated to perfection: too much heat, and the skin would crack; too little, and moisture would invite decay. The embalmers adjusted temperature, humidity, and composition intuitively, as if guided by instinct older than science. What they achieved was extraordinary. The bacterial enzymes that destroy organic matter were halted at the molecular level. Proteins cross-linked tissues mineralized. The body stopped being biology and became artifact. In essence, they turned flesh into stone. For the Egyptians, this was not vanity. It was continuity. The body was an anchor for the Ka, the life force that would return each morning like the rising sun. To preserve the body was to preserve identity. But beneath that spiritual vision lay a deeper truth the Egyptians had discovered through devotion: the principles of biochemistry. They understood decomposition without naming it. They used resins that resisted microbial life salts, that desiccated oils that sealed pores. Their process combined dehydration, sterilization, and sealing, the same triad modern preservation still uses. Yet theirs worked for thousands of years, while ours fail in centuries. Somewhere between belief and technique, they achieved equilibrium with decay itself. It is tempting to call this magic, but perhaps it was simply wisdom expressed through ritual. In the Egyptian worldview, every craft was sacred. The embalmer's workshop was a temple. The tools were relics. Each incision was accompanied by prayer, not as superstition, but as method, focus, precision, intention. They understood that mastery over matter required reverence. That understanding might be the ingredient we have lost. For the Greeks and Romans, who came later, mummification seemed barbaric, an obsession with death. But the Egyptians saw it differently. To them, death was only another form of life, one that required as much preparation as birth. They saw the body not as prison, but as instrument. By preserving it, they preserved memory, and memory to them was the true soul. Modern science can reconstruct the materials, but not the mindset. When researchers attempt to replicate the process, their mummies decay within decades. The texture of the skin, the flexibility of the joints, the color all differ. Something in the original process remains invisible. Some scholars propose that the key lies in the sequence of steps, the timing of salt application, the precise humidity of the chamber, or the interaction between plant resins. Others suspect the real secret was environmental, the unique microbiology of the Nile, the trace minerals of its water, the chemistry of its soil. Yet none of these theories fully explain the miracle of endurance. Perhaps the answer lies in their philosophy rather than their science. The Egyptians believed that decay begins not in the body, but in neglect. They tended their dead as one tends the living with daily rituals, offerings, words. Every act of remembrance was a form of preservation. Forgetting, therefore, was the true death. In that sense, the entire civilization was a vast laboratory of memory. Each tomb was a data archive, each inscription a code. Their hieroglyphs recorded more than names, they encoded instructions for the soul's return. The Book of the Dead was less scripture than manual, guiding the traveler through the physics of the afterlife. If you think of it that way, the Egyptians were the first to merge biology, engineering, and spirituality into one seamless system, a technology of immortality. Their goal was not to stop time, but to synchronize with it. The body would rest while the spirit continued its journey, looping through eternity like the cycles of the sun. And perhaps that's why their knowledge disappeared. When Alexander's armies arrived, when Rome absorbed Egypt, when Christianity redefined death as resurrection rather than return, the old art became heresy. The priests who knew its methods were silenced or absorbed into new orders. The workshops closed, the rituals banned. The great laboratory of the afterlife was dismantled, and with it vanished a way of thinking, the idea that science and soul could coexist. Today we study the mummies as curiosities, scanning them with X-rays, measuring isotopes, tracing diets and diseases. We have learned much about the past, but little about ourselves. The ancients sought to understand what connects matter to meaning. We, in our dissection, have separated them completely. In the end, our science can analyze their success, but not replicate their faith. And without that faith, without that alignment between purpose and process, the formula remains incomplete. Maybe that is the lesson hidden inside every sarcophagus. Immortality is not a chemical state, but a relationship between the living and the dead. As long as someone remembers your name, you remain in the world. When the last voice forgets, even the best resin cannot save you. The Egyptians understood the truth better than we do. They built a civilization dedicated to remembrance. Their pyramids were not tombs, but amplifiers of memory. In museums today, the faces of mummies lie under glass eyes, closed expressions, calm. The linen has yellowed, the air smells faintly of dust and resin. Yet when you stand before them, you feel something unsettling, not decay, but endurance. The body still resists time as if waiting for the next sunrise. Perhaps in some way their science worked, not because it defeated death, but because it taught death how to wait. The science of the dead, then, is not lost at all. It survives in every attempt we make to remember, to preserve, to archive ourselves. From digital data to frozen embryos, from medical cryonics to artificial intelligence, we continue the same quest to make matter hold meaning forever. We are the new embalmers, still chasing eternity with more machines and fewer prayers. And yet for all our progress, the Egyptians might still be winning. Their bodies remain. Their names are still spoken. Their memory still walks the earth that they left behind. Perhaps that is the truest immortality, to be remembered so long that even dust cannot forget you. High in the Andes, where air thins and silence grows heavy, stones fit together with such precision that a blade of grass cannot pass between them. Walls tilt inward at subtle angles, each block interlocked like the facets of a single organism. No mortar, no cement, no iron pins. Just stone, enormous, irregular, alive. This is the architecture of the Inca, and it disobeys the laws of everything we think we know about construction. At Sacsayhuaman, above the old capital of Cusco, the stones rise like frozen waves. Some weigh more than 300 tons, yet they sit together as if molded, their joints so tight They have survived centuries of earthquakes that shattered everything else around them. The official explanation is patience and craftsmanship, thousands of workers shaping each stone until it matched its neighbor. But when you stand before them, when you run your fingers along the seamless curves where one boulder kisses another, that explanation begins to tremble. These are not bricks. They are sculptures fused by something that behaves less like carving and more like casting. How did they do it? Archaeologists suggest that Inca masons used stone hammers to peck surfaces for months until they fit perfectly. It is possible, yes, but improbable. The logistics alone defy comprehension. To move a block the size of a bus up a mountain without wheels or beasts of burden would require an engineering precision modern equipment struggles to match. The Inca left no written record of their methods. Their genius is visible only in the silence of stone. When Spanish chroniclers first saw these walls, they refused to believe human hands had made them. Some claimed they were remnants of an older divine race. Others accused the Inca of sorcery. The truth, as always, is somewhere in between. These structures were not built by magic, but by a worldview in which matter itself was sacred. The Inca saw the world as Pachamama, Mother Earth, alive, conscious, responsive. To shape stone was to speak with her, not to conquer her. Their buildings were not imposed upon the land, but grown from it, aligned with magnetic fields, solstices, and mountain shadows. Architecture was not geometry, it was conversation. That philosophy may be the missing element in the technical puzzle. When you treat stone as alive, you interact with it differently. You listen. You observe how it breathes, how it fractures, how it carries weight. The Inca masons likely learned to anticipate the invisible properties of rock, the grain, the resonance, the tension, through generations of tactile intuition. Their tools were simple, but their perception was complex. Where we see inert matter, they saw participation. Yet even with this insight, certain features remain inexplicable. In sites like Ollantaytambo and Machu Picchu, there are blocks that appear partially melted edges, rounded as though softened before being set. Modern theories attempt to explain this through friction heating or local polishing, but none account for the consistency of the effect. Some independent researchers have proposed that the Inca, or perhaps a culture before them, knew how to manipulate stone at the molecular level, perhaps through chemical softening or vibration. It sounds impossible, and yet the stones themselves stand as testimony that something extraordinary happened here. In recent years, geologists studying the surfaces have found traces of heat alteration minerals fused in ways that require temperatures higher than open-air fires can produce. Did the builders use plant-based acids? Did they harness sound, as some Andean myths describe tones that could make rocks dance? There is no evidence definitive enough to say, but there is evidence enough to wonder. The Inca did not build for decoration. They built for balance. Each temple, each terrace, each wall was part of a cosmic grid connecting sky, earth, and water. Their city of Cusco was laid out in the shape of a puma. Their pathways followed the flow of rivers and stars. The precision of their stonework mirrored their understanding of harmony. A wall was not simply a structure, it was a prayer written in geology. When earthquakes came, their walls flexed and settled, absorbing vibration rather than resisting it. Nature tested them, and they yielded without falling. That is engineering by empathy. The Spanish conquerors, with all their steel and horses, could not destroy these stones. They tried to dismantle Sacsayhuaman to reuse its blocks for cathedrals, but many could not be moved. Even with iron tools and oxen, they lay still indifferent. The stones that refused to obey one empire survived another. They remain not as ruins, but as reminders that technology is not always about control. Sometimes it is about communion. What if the reason we cannot reproduce Inca architecture is because we no longer share their perception of reality? We think of building as assembly, adding parts until a structure stands. The Inca thought of it as alignment, cooperating with forces already present. They tuned architecture to the landscape the way a musician tunes an instrument. The mountain was not background, it was blueprint. To build like that requires patience, measured not in hours but in generations. Each mason inherited not formulas, but rhythms. They learned by touch, by sound, by the way sunlight traced the stones at noon. There is an intelligence that lives in the hands, and it dies when the hands stop making. When the Spanish conquered the Andes, they killed more than a people. They killed a way of perceiving the material world as alive, responsive, divine. Modern engineers can build towers that scrape the sky, but they cannot rebuild a wall that breathes. Our structures defy gravity, but not time. The Inca walls silent and still defy both. Their technology was not mechanical, it was relational. The genius was not in tools, but in attention. They noticed what we ignore. It's easy to romanticize the ancients, to imagine lost sciences and mystical powers, but perhaps the truth is simpler and more profound. They knew what we have forgotten, that technology begins with respect. Every great civilization seems to rediscover this truth and then lose it. The Egyptians aligned their tombs with stars, the Romans built concrete that healed the Inca-shaped mountains into sanctuaries. In each case, understanding matter required humility before it. And in each case, when pride replaced reverence, the knowledge vanished. Maybe that is why the Inca architecture still stands while ours decay. The stones remember the mindset of their makers. The alignment endures even when the language is gone. The vibrations of intention once set in matter do not easily fade. The Inca did not inscribe words into stone, they inscribed relationship. Standing before Sacsayhuaman, the traveler feels something strange. The walls seem to hum in the wind. Light slides along their edges like water. The joints breathe. There is a sense of equilibrium in architecture that neither dominates nor submits. It simply exists perfect within its own silence. You begin to understand why so many who have seen it call it the architecture of the impossible. But perhaps it is not the stones that are impossible. Perhaps it is us. We have learned to move mountains but not to listen to them. We have mastered the language of force but not the dialect of harmony. The Inca, with no wheels, no steel, no machines, built something that our machines cannot replicate. That paradox should humble us. It suggests that progress is not always upward. Sometimes it is outward into deeper communion with the world. When night falls over Cusco, the stars align over the same stones that once aligned to them. The sky repeats its pattern, the earth remembers its shape. Time loops as it always does. And somewhere in that loop lies a truth older than science, that matter listens. The Inca knew how to speak to it. We perhaps have forgotten the language. Long before the Wright brothers, long before engines, pistons, or blueprints, the ancient world already spoke of machines that flew. Across the texts of India carved into temples, sung in epics older than history itself, appear descriptions of vehicles called Vimana machines that rose into the sky, glided across continents, and vanished into clouds with the brilliance of lightning. To the modern mind, they sound like myth, but to the people who recorded them, they were memory. The Sanskrit epics, the Mahabharata, the Ramayana, and the Vaimanika Shastra speak of flying chariots powered by light and sound, guided by knowledge, not by wings. The Ramayana describes the Pushpaka Vimana, a craft that could travel through the air as swiftly as thought itself. The Mahabharata tells of sky battles with weapons that glowed like 1,000 suns, capable of reducing cities to dust. The stories sound like legends, but they are recorded with a level of technical specificity that feels unnervingly deliberate. Dimensions, materials, even propulsion mechanisms. Skeptics call them poetic exaggerations, metaphors for divine power. Yet the details persist. The Vaimanika Shastra, a text rediscovered in the early 20th century, but claimed to be based on ancient sources, describes metals that do not corrode mirrors, that protect pilots from heat, and engines powered by mercury vortexes. The language is symbolic, but its imagery is mechanical. It is as if someone long ago tried to describe advanced technology using the vocabulary of their age. What makes this mystery deeper is its consistency. Similar accounts appear in other cultures separated by oceans and millennia. The fiery chariots of Ezekiel, the feathered serpents of Mesoamerica, the thunderbirds of the north, the winged discs carved into Sumerian temples. Each civilization remembers the sky not as emptiness, but as infrastructure. It is as if humanity once shared an unspoken memory that flight was once possible. Of course, mainstream archaeology rejects this. No physical evidence of Vimanas exists. No engines, no alloys, no wreckage. But absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. It is merely an invitation to look deeper. What if these machines were not built of metal, but of principles we no longer understand, principles that merge consciousness with material energy, with intention? In ancient Indian cosmology, sound nada was the root of creation. Everything vibrated into existence. If matter is vibration, then to control vibration is to control form, motion, and perhaps flight itself. Some researchers have noted that descriptions of Vimana propulsion, whirling energy, vertical lift, radiant sound, align with modern studies of acoustic levitation and plasma dynamics. In laboratories today, scientists can make small objects hover using focused sound waves or electromagnetic fields. The ancients in their metaphoric language spoke of songs that carried cities. Could it be that they witnessed something we have only begun to rediscover? Even if Vimanas were myth, the question remains, why did so many ancient cultures invest their greatest poetry and architecture into the dream of flight? The desire to rise to transcend gravity seems universal and older than religion itself. Perhaps flight to them was not a technology, but a state of consciousness, a metaphor for enlightenment made literal. The temples of India seem to remember this. The very word Vimana later came to mean temple tower, a structure built to mirror the cosmic vehicle of the gods. Each tier represents a plane of existence, each spire points to the infinite. In stone, they built what they could no longer build in air. The dream of flight became architecture. Imagine the scene in some forgotten era before myth solidified into scripture. Crafts of light rising from sacred lakes, priests recording their glow in hymns, philosophers debating the ethics of sky travel. Then, as with every other technology humanity touched, something happened. Pride, catastrophe, forgetting. The knowledge vanished, leaving only language behind. What was once literal became metaphorical. Machines became myths. The Mahabharata describes a weapon unleashed from the sky that blazed with the radiance of 1,000 suns and left hair and nails falling from men. Some read this as poetic symbolism, others as eerie resemblance to nuclear radiation. The truth is uncertain, but the pattern is familiar. The higher the knowledge, the greater the danger. The brighter the light, the deeper the shadow. Every lost technology in history ends the same way, with brilliance mistaken for divinity and fear turning memory into myth. If we strip away the mythology, we are left with a striking thought: perhaps ancient civilizations explored forces we are only now rediscovering under different names: electromagnetism, resonance, plasma sound. Perhaps their machines of the gods were early experiments in manipulating the unseen architecture of nature. Not mechanical engines, but harmonic ones. In Sanskrit, the word vimana can mean to measure or to traverse. It implies geometry, proportion, control. The same mathematical precision appears in the temple layouts of India: structures aligned to cardinal points, ratios encoded in musical scales, patterns that mirror planetary motion. To build a temple was to construct a frequency, not just a building. The devotee walking its steps was moving through a vibrational map of the cosmos. In that sense, every temple was a grounded vimana, a stationary vehicle for transcendence. Modern researchers analyzing the acoustics of these temples have discovered something remarkable when mantras are chanted within their halls. The architecture amplifies specific frequencies that resonate with the human body's natural rhythms. The stone literally sings. It vibrates. To stand within such a temple is to stand inside an instrument tuned to the universe. The ancients may not have lost flight after all they transformed it. They learned to make the sky come down to earth. That transformation holds a quiet beauty. When the means to travel physically through the heavens vanished, humanity learned to travel spiritually instead. Meditation replaced machinery. Chant replaced engine. The dream of flying became the dream of awakening. Still, there are questions that refuse to die. Ancient carvings show figures seated in capsules, wheels of fire beneath them. Legends speak of beings descending from stars, teaching astronomy, agriculture, metallurgy, then vanishing. Were these stories the fading memory of a contact long before history? Or are they archetypes, universal expressions of the human will to transcend the ground? The evidence neither confirms nor denies. It only invites humility. If Vimanas truly existed, they did not vanish because of lack of power. They vanished because of excess of it. The same energy that lifts can also destroy. In every age, when humans reach too high, the sky pushes back. Icarus burns, Babel falls, Atlantis sinks. Perhaps the flight of the gods was simply the first chapter in that recurring story, the moment when humanity touched the stars, then forgot how to return. Yet the dream remains. Our rockets, drones, satellites all are modern echoes of the same impulse. We seek again the lost path upward, building machines that roar where the old ones hummed. And maybe beneath our metals and circuits, the same vibration still calls to us the sound the ancients once heard when they said the sky itself could sing. The Vimana, whether real or remembered, stands as symbol of that yearning. It reminds us that flight is not just movement through space, it is the expression of imagination unbound by gravity. Every invention since balloon glider, jet spacecraft is a footnote to that ancient aspiration. We have rebuilt the mechanics but not the meaning. The ancients sought flight to approach the divine. We pursue it to escape the earth. Perhaps that is why our machines, though louder, feel emptier. They conquer distance but not wonder. The Vimanas, if they existed, united both. They flew not just through air but through understanding. Their pilots were philosophers as much as engineers. When we gaze at the sky now filled with satellites and contrails, it seems conquered. Yet sometimes in moments of quiet, you can sense that it still waits for us to remember. Maybe that is the real lost technology, not engines or alloys, but reverence. The ancients looked upward and saw home. We look upward and see space. The difference between the two may decide which of us truly learn to fly. Across the deserts of ancient Persia, where rain is a rumor and sunlight reigns like a god, human beings once learned how to summon coolness out of heat water, out of dust, and life out of silence. They did it not with machines, not with fuel or electricity, but with understanding. What they built was so effective that their creations still function today, some after more than 2,000 years. The modern world calls them ancient air conditioners. The Persians called them badgirs and qanats, the towers of wind and the tunnels of water. Together they formed one of the most sophisticated environmental systems ever conceived, a forgotten network of sustainable engineering that modern science is only beginning to appreciate. In the heart of Yazd, where summer temperatures can reach 50 degrees Celsius, slender towers rise from rooftops like sentinels. Each one faces a different direction, their mouths open to the wind. Inside, a labyrinth of shafts channels the breeze downward into the living spaces below, cooling the air by evaporation as it passes over underground water channels. No fans, no compressors, only geometry, gravity, and the breath of the desert. These towers, the badgirs, harnessed what we now call fluid dynamics centuries before it had a name. The system works through principles of pressure difference. When wind enters one side of the tower, it creates suction on the opposite side, drawing warm air out of the house. The incoming air cools as it travels past the moist surfaces of subterranean reservoirs. The result is not just comfort, but balance, a microclimate maintained entirely by design. Modern architects have tested the efficiency of these towers and found them capable of reducing indoor temperatures by more than 20 degrees without any external energy source. In a world now obsessed with air conditioning and carbon emissions, this ancient simplicity feels almost prophetic. But cooling was only half of Persia's genius. Beneath the earth stretched another miracle, the qanat, an underground aqueduct system that carried water from mountain springs to distant villages through a network of gently sloping tunnels. Some qanats extended for more than 50 kilometers, descending less than a meter per kilometer, maintaining a perfect gradient without pumps or machines. Each tunnel was dug by hand using only intuition, gravity, and mathematics born from observation. Shafts punctuated the surface at regular intervals, allowing ventilation and access for maintenance. These vertical wells gleaming under the desert sun looked like constellations of light scattered across the sand. From above, the earth itself seemed to breathe. The qanat transformed barren lands into gardens. It allowed cities to exist where nature had said no. And it did so sustainably, no waste, no evaporation, no depletion. The water flowed gently, protected from the sun, shared through social contracts older than written law. The community maintained the system as one organism. Neglect of a single shaft endangered all. In that sense, the qanat was not merely an engineering achievement, it was a moral one. It turned cooperation into infrastructure. Archaeologists have traced the first qanats to around 1000 BCE, spreading later to Egypt, Arabia, and even as far as Spain and China. Wherever they went, they carried a philosophy that human survival depends not on conquering nature, but conversing with it. The Persians did not fight the desert, they negotiated with it. Every tunnel, every tower, every brick was a sentence in that ongoing dialogue. In contrast, modern civilization builds for dominance. We dam rivers, air condition the planet, cut mountains, and call it progress. Yet our systems fail when power goes out, when fuel runs dry. The ancient Persians built for endurance. Their designs required no maintenance contracts, no imported parts. They used the language of physics as prayer, turning necessity into harmony. It was an intelligence born of scarcity, and perhaps that is why it feels so alien to us now. One of the most astonishing examples of this harmony is the Yakchal, a word that means ice pit. Imagine a desert so hot the ground burns your feet, and in its center stands a dome of mud brick, 40 feet tall. Inside that dome lies ice, not by miracle but by design. The Persians mastered passive refrigeration 2,000 years before modern freezers. During winter nights, when desert temperatures dropped below freezing, shallow pools near the Yakchal captured thin layers of ice. The structure's thick, heat-resistant walls, combined with an underground storage pit, cooled by airflow from qanats and badgirs, preserved that ice throughout the scorching summer. Some ice houses even supplied royal courts hundreds of miles away. In the age of drought, they manufactured winter. Consider what that means. They created cold without combustion refrigeration, without machine sustainability, without slogans. Their technology was not primitive, it was elegant. The Yakchal, the qanat, the badgir, three parts of one philosophy, a trinity of earth, water, and air, brought into equilibrium. Fire was the only element they refused to use, perhaps because they understood that fire, once tamed, demands fuel. The others once understood give freely. This ecological intelligence was rooted in Zoroastrian cosmology, one of the world's oldest monotheistic faiths. In that tradition, the natural elements were sacred embodiments of divine order. To pollute water was sin, to waste it, heresy. Architecture, therefore, was theology. The balance of temperature, light, and airflow reflected the moral balance of creation itself. The environment was not a resource, it was a relationship. The engineers of ancient Persia did not separate science from spirit. They built with conscience. When the Islamic Golden Age dawned, Persia's systems inspired new wonders. Scholars in Baghdad studied the mathematics of air pressure, water flow, and thermal exchange derived from these ancient models. The principles eventually traveled west, influencing Moorish Spain, whose palaces like the Alhambra echo the Persian art of water and wind. The whisper of fountains in Granada carries the same logic born in Yazd beauty as climate control art as physics. From there, the knowledge drifted north, diluted by centuries until Europe forgot where it came from. Today, remnants of qanats still deliver water to towns in Iran, Afghanistan, and Oman. Some have flowed continuously for more than 2 millennia. The badgirs of Yazd still capture wind as they did before Rome existed. The Yakchals still hold their chill. And yet in our modern textbooks, their names appear as curiosities, not as foundations. We marvel at them as relics when they might be blueprints for our survival. Perhaps that is the real loss, not the structures themselves, but the worldview that made them possible. The ancients built for continuity. We build for consumption. They saw sustainability not as innovation, but as obligation. In forgetting them, we have forgotten our place in the conversation with nature. We no longer listen to wind or water. We command them, and in doing so, we lose both their cooperation and our balance. If the Antikythera Mechanism was a machine that remembered the sky, and the Inca walls were stones that remembered the earth, then the Persian qanat is a river that remembers humanity. It still flows quietly beneath the noise of modern cities, reminding us that intelligence does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers underground. The technology of the ancients was not magic, it was attention. They observed the universe not to control it, but to belong within it. As the sun sets over Yazd, the wind towers catch the last light, their shadows long and precise. The air cools, the desert exhales. Somewhere below, in tunnels carved by forgotten hands, water moves in silence. You can almost hear the echo of that ancient promise, the sound of civilization breathing with the earth, not against it. Long before silicon, electricity, or code, there were machines that moved as if alive. They walked, sang, poured wine, bowed to kings. Some played music with perfect rhythm, others spoke in voices of air and bronze. The ancient world called them automata. We call them the ancestors of robots. They existed thousands of years before the first industrial gear ever turned, and yet they vanished as completely as if they had never been. The story begins in Alexandria around the 3rd century BCE, when the city stood as the brain of the ancient world. In its workshops, engineers like Heron of Alexandria built devices that stunned philosophers and priests alike. Heron designed doors that opened by themselves when fire burned on an altar. Heat expanded air, creating pressure that moved hidden pistons. He created a theater in which miniature actors performed entire plays using weights and pulleys. He built fountains that refilled endlessly, singing birds, powered by steam, and even a coin-operated dispenser that released holy water when money was dropped inside. 2,000 years before the modern vending machine, faith and physics met in the same gesture. Heron's writings describe not only his own inventions, but a lineage that stretched back to earlier Greek and Egyptian craftsmen. Among them was Ctesibius, a genius of the 3rd century BCE, who invented water clocks so precise that they rivaled mechanical timepieces of the Renaissance. He discovered the principles of air compression and built organs whose sound came not from human lungs, but from captured wind. Each of these devices embodied a principle that modern science would later rediscover under new names: pneumatics, hydraulics, automation. Yet in their time, they were not called machines, they were called miracles. To the ancient mind, these moving statues blurred the line between art and life. In temples, priests used mechanical birds that sang at sunrise, or statues that poured libations during rituals. The public saw divine power, the engineers saw balanced pressure timing. But perhaps the most remarkable fact is not that they could do it, it is that they did it for beauty, not for war. The first machines of the ancient world were not weapons. They were imitations of creation, built in reverence, not competition. Then, as always, the thread of memory frayed. The Library of Alexandria burned. The workshops fell silent. For centuries, the designs of Heron and Ctesibius existed only as fragments, copied by scribes who did not understand them. But the idea did not die. It traveled east. During the Islamic Golden Age, from the 8th to the 13th century, that spark of mechanical genius was rekindled. In the courts of Baghdad and Damascus, a group of engineers known as the Banu Musa brothers wrote the Book of Ingenious Devices, a catalog of over 100 machines that could move, respond, and even imitate decision-making. There were self-trimming lamps, automatic fountains, musical instruments, and mechanical servants that refilled cups when they emptied. The text described valves, feedback loops, and control systems centuries before such words existed in modern engineering. One of their contemporaries, the brilliant inventor Al-Jazari, created machines that remain unparalleled in imagination. His Book of Knowledge of Ingenious Mechanical Devices, written in 1206, includes diagrams for water-powered clocks, robotic peacocks that offered soap and towels to guests, and an automated orchestra of drummers and flutists. His designs used cams, gears, and hydraulic power in ways that prefigure robotics. The so-called elephant clock, his most famous creation, was more than a timekeeper. It was a symbol of unity, combining Greek gears, Indian numerals, and Islamic architecture into one harmonious mechanism. It was technology as philosophy, a working metaphor for a world held together by motion and balance. To modern eyes, these devices look like toys, curiosities, but to their creators, they were acts of revelation. They believed that by making matter move, one could glimpse the secret of life itself. Al-Jazari wrote that the subtlety of the craftsman is a reflection of the divine order. In other words, to engineer was to worship. This worldview where machine and soul coexist is almost unrecognizable today. We see machines as tools, extensions of human will. The ancients saw them as collaborators. They believed everything that moves contains Ru spirit breath animation. Their automata were not dead mechanisms. They were vessels through which order entered chaos. When Heron's temple doors opened, people saw the will of the gods, not the expansion of air. When Al-Jazari's musicians played, they believed sound itself had consciousness. It was a science without cynicism. And then once more, the forgetting came. The Mongol invasions destroyed the libraries of Baghdad. Al-Jazari's devices disappeared. Only a few manuscripts survived, drifting across continents, miscopied, mistranslated. Europe would later rediscover some of these ideas during the Renaissance, attributing them to Da Vinci. But even Da Vinci's notebooks echo the same longing, the desire to build motion that feels alive, to summon thought out of mechanism. It is a longing that never left us. Every age rediscovers the automaton in a new form. Heron's altar doors become our automatic sensors. Al-Jazari's orchestra becomes the player piano. Ctesibius's hydraulic organs evolve into engines, turbines, computers. And yet the question remains the same. Can something made by human hands possess intention? When we design systems that learn, that anticipate, that choose, are we creating life or remembering how it was once created? Perhaps artificial intelligence is not a new invention, but an ancient echo. The same curiosity that led Heron to fill his pipes with air now drives us to fill algorithms with data. Both acts come from the same desire to reproduce the unseen intelligence that animates the world. The ancients called it spirit. We call it code. The names change, the mystery does not. What makes the story of the forgotten automata so haunting is its rhythm. Each time humanity builds something that mimics life, it also destroys the context that made it sacred. The machines of Alexandria perished in fire. The devices of Baghdad drowned in war. The Renaissance turned the automaton into spectacle. And now in our digital age, we risk doing the same, creating intelligence without wisdom, movement without meaning. The ancients would have seen that as imbalance, a breach in the moral order of creation. Heron's temple doors, Al-Jazari's fountains, the Banu Musa's musicians all shared one principle: equilibrium. Every motion required counter-motion. Every cause had feedback. Their machines embodied what philosophers later called homeostasis. They taught that perfection lies not in infinite power, but in self-correction. It is a lesson modern technology struggles to remember. Our systems scale faster than our ethics, our algorithms adapt, but do not empathize. Perhaps what the ancients understood, and we have forgotten, is that a machine without soul becomes a mirror of our emptiness. Imagine walking through a museum where one of Al-Jazari's automata has been rebuilt. Gears turn, water flows, bronze birds tilt their heads. For a moment you feel something uncanny, not fear, not admiration, but recognition. You realize this is not the future. It is the past remembering itself. The machine breathes because someone long ago believed the universe itself was mechanical and divine in the same breath. That belief may be the oldest technology of all, the conviction that order can emerge from chaos if intention is pure. The forgotten automata are not just curiosities from a vanished age. They are symbols of what happens when humanity builds with reverence. Their creators did not seek to replace life. They sought to honor it by imitation. Their machines had souls because their makers believed everything did. Perhaps that is the real secret we lost, not how to build, but why. The ancients created mechanisms to reflect the harmony of the cosmos. We create them to optimize, to replace, to compete. Somewhere in that shift, the breath left the body. The machines still move, but they no longer sing. And yet if you listen closely, you can still hear the echo, the soft hiss of air in Heron's pipes, the rhythmic drip of water in Al-Jazari's fountains. It sounds like memory trying to breathe again. The ancients called it spirit. The modern world calls it data. But maybe they are the same thing: motion that remembers. The forgotten automata stand as a mirror between past and present. They ask a question that no machine can answer, but every civilization must face when we finally create life from lifelessness. Will it reflect our wisdom or our forgetfulness? Dust is what remains when memory finishes speaking. It settles over stone, over paper, over time itself, indifferent to what it covers. Yet dust is not absence. It is accumulation, the visible trace of everything that once existed together. In that sense, dust remembers more faithfully than we do. It records without judgment. It holds the fragments of empires, names, and lives long after the stories have faded. Beneath it, echoes endure. The story that began with a flame ends here in silence. Greek fire, the Antikythera Mechanism, Damascus Steel, Roman concrete, Egyptian mummification, Inca stonework, the sky machines of India, the water architects of Persia, the automata of Alexandria, all chapters of the same book, a chronicle of brilliance followed by forgetting. Not one of these technologies was truly lost. They were buried, sometimes by war, sometimes by religion, sometimes by fear. Their disappearance was not erasure, but design. Each was a moment when humanity looked too closely at its own reflection and decided to turn away. If we trace these vanishings together, a pattern appears. It is the same shape carved into every civilization's rise and fall. The ascent from curiosity to mastery, the shimmer of perfection, the sudden silence that follows. Knowledge, it seems, has its own seasons. It blooms, it burns, it sleeps, and it returns. Each age thinks it is the first to awaken, but history is a circle pretending to be a line. The ancients may not have shared our technology, but they understood its nature better than we do. They knew that knowledge is not a ladder to climb, but a rhythm to respect. When it accelerates faster than wisdom, it collapses. That is why their greatest inventions, fire that burned on water metal, that sang stone that healed, were always built with reverence. Each discovery was also a prayer. Their technology sought alignment, not dominance. Ours seeks the opposite. We call their world mythic because it frightens us. The thought that our ancestors might have known something we do not unsettles the illusion of progress. We prefer to believe that time only moves forward, that what is gone stays gone. But perhaps forgetting is not failure, it is defense. The universe hides certain knowledge from us until we are ready to remember it. The ancients reached the edge of understanding, saw what waited beyond, and stepped back. Their ruins are not signs of ignorance. They are warnings written in stone. Look closely, and every forgotten technology carries a mirror message. Greek fire warns of power without conscience. The Antikythera Mechanism warns of knowledge lost to arrogance. Damascus Steel warns of beauty consumed by violence. Roman concrete warns that endurance without humility turns to ruin. The mummification of Egypt warns that the quest for immortality can freeze the living. The Inca stones warn that mastery over matter dies with the loss of reverence. The Vimanas warn that ascension without wisdom leads to the fall. The Khanats of Persia warn that harmony must be maintained, not extracted. The automata warn that intelligence without soul becomes mimicry. Each memory erases itself when its meaning is betrayed. Perhaps that is why these technologies did not simply disappear, they withdrew. They went dormant like seeds, waiting for a climate of consciousness to return. When we rediscover them through microscopes, algorithms, or archaeology, we call it innovation. But what if it is recollection? What if human progress is not a march forward, but the slow act of remembering what we once knew before we learned to doubt it? Our age, too, sits at the edge of that same pattern. We build machines that think, materials that heal, algorithms that predict. We create fire that burns without flamestone, that rebuilds itself, steel that cuts through atoms. We have become the inheritors of all the forgotten miracles, but we have not yet learned why they were forgotten. We imagine ourselves as the peak of history, yet our towers crumble as quickly as they rise. Our technologies advance faster than our understanding of their consequences. We remember the formula, but not the wisdom that once balanced it. In that sense, we are both ancient and newborn children with the toys of gods. Every civilization before us reached this moment, the point when its creations began to mirror its creators. The Byzantines saw it in fire, the Greeks in gears, the Persians in water, the Arabs in automata. We see it now in code. The tools have changed, the parable has not. When matter begins to imitate mind, the question is no longer what can we make, but what should we remember? It is tempting to imagine a single lost civilization, the mythical Tartaria, Atlantis, Lemuria, whose knowledge scattered and became the fragments we now rediscover. But perhaps the truth is quieter and more intimate. Every civilization becomes its own Atlantis. Every culture forgets what it cannot bear to carry. Each one buries the part of itself that burned too brightly. Forgetting is not destruction, it is hibernation. If we listen carefully, we can still hear the hum beneath the noise, the same frequency that once powered the fire of Byzantium, the gears of Greece, the steel of Damascus, the stones of Cusco, the wind of Yazd. It is the sound of intention. The ancients understood that all technology begins as consciousness made visible. What we call invention is simply thought solidified. But thought, like matter, obeys laws. It can corrode, it can fracture, it can forget itself. Perhaps this is what the ancients tried to tell us in their myths, that the fall of every great age begins not with ignorance, but with amnesia. When memory separates from meaning, knowledge becomes noise. A civilization does not collapse when it runs out of power. It collapses when it runs out of purpose. That is when the lights go out, the libraries burn, the formulas vanish, and the dust begins to settle again, waiting for another dawn. But the circle never truly ends. Each rediscovery reawakens the same question: can we remember? Without repeating, The Greek engineers, the Persian architects, the Egyptian priests, the Inca masons, the philosophers of India, all built their world around continuity. They knew that to preserve a thing, you must build it in rhythm with nature, not against it. That is why their works endure. Our world, for all its power, feels temporary because it no longer resonates with that rhythm. Maybe that is the next evolution, not faster machines, but deeper memory. Not more invention, but wiser remembrance. The ancients saw creation as a sacred act. We see it as industry. They built with alignment. We build with urgency. And perhaps that difference is why they remain in ruins that still breathe, while our glass towers, for all their brilliance, already feel obsolete. If there is a secret woven through every forgotten technology, it is this: nothing built without reverence survives time. The ancients knew it. They built as if watched by eternity. Their monuments were not declarations of power, but invitations to silence. We have the power to recreate their materials, their chemistry, their mechanisms, but without their humility, what we rebuild will not last. Endurance, it turns out, is a moral quality. One day, centuries from now, when future archaeologists sift through the remains of our age, our servers, our satellites, our silicon temples, they will find fragments and ask the same questions we ask of the past. Who built this? Why did they stop? What were they trying to remember? And perhaps they will find this same cycle, repeating discovery, mastery, pride, lost rediscovery. The wheel turns again. The forgotten technologies of history are not mysteries to solve. They are mirrors to hold. They remind us that the greatest power is not invention, but remembrance. Every age that forgets that truth must learn it again through ruin. But maybe this time we can choose differently. Maybe we can remember without burning. Maybe the fire can remain alight. Dust is still falling as it always has. It covers our ruins as gently as it covered theirs. But dust does not erase. It preserves. It waits. And if we listen closely enough, it whispers the same ancient promise that has survived every fall. And every forgetting what was lost was never truly gone. It was only waiting for us to remember.